Do you remember that sound? Not the cry of the street, not the roar of traffic, but a deep, almost primal thud. The door closes, and the outside world vanishes, dissolving away. And then it wraps around you, that very smell. Old timber, worn smooth by hundreds of hands. The thick, slightly sweet aroma of aged ale, mingling with pipe smoke and something else, something as familiar as the warmth of a hearth. Your feet sink slightly into the soft, threadbare carpet, while your eyes adjust to the golden half-light, where every corner seems filled with secrets, strange, yet oddly familiar. Your ears catch the muffled hum of voices, the clink of glasses, somewhere in the distance the soft thunk of a dart hitting its mark. If you lived through those years, this isn't a story, it's a memory. And in that moment, you're not just looking. You're there, you've returned, you've just felt its walls, its scents, its breath. But what truly filled this world? It was the faces. The faces you saw every evening, every Sunday. At the center, of course, was him asterisk, the man behind the bar. The owner, not just a bartender, not just the landlord. He was the heart of the place, its unofficial mayor, its living conscience. You remember his apron, always a little damp from spilled ale, his hands moving deftly across the polished counter. He knew your name, your drink, even if you never said a word. One glance, and he was already reaching for your pint, understanding you without the need for speech. He could tell if you were down, if something had happened. He could listen without interrupting, offer advice no one had asked for, but that you needed more than anything. He was the keeper of the neighborhood's secrets. You could come to him with anything, from family troubles to a broken car, and he, or his wife always standing nearby, would find a solution, or at least a word of comfort. And around him, like planets around the sun, were the regulars. The faithful few, your chosen family. Do you remember old Bill? Always in the same chair by the window, his newspaper rustling softly, glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. Or Maggie, who arrived at exactly 4, to sip her half pint and talk about the latest on the telly. They weren't just customers, they were part of the furniture, woven into the fabric of the pub itself. You might not have known their names, but you knew their habits, their laughter, their favorite corners. You knew that if you came on a Thursday, you'd find them all gathered at the domino table, the familiar clack of tiles echoing through the room. And you were one of them. If you lived through those times, this isn't a story, it's a memory. A memory of those who simply nodded when you walked in, and you knew it meant hello. A memory of those who silently shuffled over to make room on the bench, or passed you the paper as soon as they'd finished. It was a place where you were seen, where you were known. Out there, you might have been a banker or a miner, a teacher or a bus driver, but here, at this bar, everyone was equal. What mattered wasn't your title, but your story, your ability to listen, and your turn to buy a round. You could spend an hour in near silence, just soaking in the company of others, knowing you weren't alone. You didn't have to speak to feel like part of something greater than a gathering of strangers. And then there was that moment, you ordered your drink, and the landlord, without even looking up, just nodded. You heard the distinct click of the tap, your glass filling, and then the cool weight of it in your hand. That wasn't just service, it was ritual, a confirmation that you belonged. It was stability in an ever-changing world. But those people, those relationships, those moments, they weren't just hanging in the air. They were part of a larger game, unspoken rules and sacred rituals that made the pub what it truly was. And that is what we'll talk about next. Yes, the people, but they didn't just come to drink. They came to live by rules not written on paper, but carried in the very air, in every gesture, in every glance. Do you remember how important it was to take your turn buying a round? It wasn't just about drinks. It was an unspoken oath of loyalty, proof that you belonged, that you respected the circle. The careful clink of coins on the counter, paying for the next round for everyone. It was a ritual that sealed friendships, a quiet promise that you were part of the pack, and you wouldn't slip away before it was your turn to treat. The games. They weren't just games. Darts was a dance of hands, eyes, and nerves. The soft whistle of a dart cutting the air, followed by the dull, satisfying thud as it struck the board. Then came the approving murmur, or a playful groan of disappointment. You could stand by the board for an hour, watching someone else play, trading only the briefest words, and still feel completely absorbed. And the domino tables, they had their own unique atmosphere. The sharp rattle of tiles being shuffled, then the crisp snap as one was placed on the table. Quiet comments, concentrated faces, sometimes bursting into contagious laughter when someone made a clever move. Or a foolish one. These games were a language without words, a way to read a person through their reactions, their honesty in losing, their humility in winning. They weren't about competition, but about time shared, about feeling that unbreakable bond. But the pub wasn't just for fun. It was the nerve center of the neighborhood. Want to know who got married? Who moved house? Who landed a new job? You came to the pub. News spread faster here than in any paper, gathering details, sometimes even turning into legend. This was where disputes were settled, truces made after fights. Where a single glance over a pint could say more than 100 words. Where you could get advice without asking, simply because someone had overheard your story and knew the answer. You could walk in after the hardest day, sit quietly in a corner, and need no words, no explanations. Just being there, soaking in the warmth of a community that asked no questions, was the best medicine. Here, you could cry. Here, you could laugh until you wept. And no one judged, because everyone understood. That's life. And of course, there was that moment. The bell rang out sharp, clear, announcing last orders. A sudden rush of energy, a gentle scramble at the bar. One more pint, one more toast, a few more minutes in that warm refuge before the doors closed again. And then, the slow, reluctant goodbyes. Chairs scraping back, last words spoken in half voices, promises to meet again tomorrow. It was the ritual of closing time, repeated day after day, year after year. A ritual just as important as the first sip itself. If you lived through those times, this isn't a story, it's a memory. A memory of invisible threads binding people together, of understanding without words, of warmth filling every moment spent within those walls. But this world, its rules, its rituals, they didn't unfold in silence. They had a soundtrack all their own. And it was just as important as the pint in your hand. You've just felt how people breathed within those walls, how they lived by their unspoken rules. But what was the backdrop to it all? What created that unique, living atmosphere you could never fake? It was the sound, not just noise, but the symphony of the pub. It began with the low hum of voices, constantly shifting in tone, from quiet murmurs to booming laughter, from focused muttering to sudden shouts. It was a living organism, breathing with you. At the center of it all was, of course, the jukebox. Do you remember it? Big, shiny, lined with records waiting their turn. The faint crackle of vinyl as you chose your song, the soft hiss before the first note played. This wasn't some sterile playlist, assembled by someone thousands of miles away. Every song was someone's choice, someone's mood, someone's little story. You might hear old rock and roll, then a heartfelt ballad, then a folk tune, followed by the latest hit. It was a living mix, built by the collective soul of the pub. And you were part of it too, adding your note to the harmony. Do you remember how, late at night, someone would start singing, and then others joined in, until the whole pub carried the chorus together? Hoarse voices, rough from laughter and beer, blending into one powerful, slightly off-key, but utterly sincere choir. And then, of course, there was the television. It wasn't always on, but when a big football or rugby match was playing, its sound became the heartbeat of the room. The steady drone of the commentator, suddenly broken by a collective roar of triumph, or a deep groan of disappointment when the team let in a goal. Every eye fixed on the screen, the air trembling with tension. And yet even then, you could still hear the clink of glasses, the odd words tossed between sips. It wasn't a cinema, it was a pub, and everyone there felt like part of one big team. Do you remember the faint creak of the floor under the landlord's steps as he moved along the bar, gathering empty glasses? or the sound of the beer tap being cleaned, a short hiss, a sign that a fresh pint was about to be poured. All these little noises, these fragments of background sound, merged into one unrepeatable melody that told you, you're home. It was a place where arguments over politics or sport could soften into playful teasing, where laughter rang out from every corner, and even honest tears drew no judgment. Because here, within this landscape of sound, everyone felt free enough to be real. It was organic, alive, not like today's sterile playlists. No recycled hits, no soulless background tracks. Just voices, laughter, clinks, clicks, hisses, and music chosen by the people themselves. If you lived through those times, this isn't a story, it's a memory. A memory of how sound could surround you, become part of you, and make you part of something greater. And it was this world of sound, along with everything it carried, that turned the pub from a place to drink into a true microcosm. It was the mirror of the neighborhood, its beating heart. And in it was reflected all of life, from joy to sorrow, from laughter to quiet comfort. You've just stepped into the sounds that filled this world, these walls. But the pub was so much more than a collection of noises and smells. It was the beating heart of the neighborhood, its social pillar. It was your refuge, your confessional, your second living room. Do you remember walking in after a hard day, and the warmth of the fireplace crackling in the corner instantly melting your fatigue away? This was the place where you could take off the mask, be yourself, and know you'd be understood. The pub was the unofficial job board and matchmaking service. How many times did you hear someone casually mention at the bar, you know, Bill's looking for an extra hand, or, my niece, she's a lovely girl, why don't you meet her? News of new jobs, new babies, weddings. Every milestone in the community was first discussed here, over a pint, long before it reached any official announcement. It was a living social network, not a feed to scroll, but a place to live and feel your connection with others. And it was a place of support. Do you remember how the landlord might quietly set aside a pint for someone going through hard times, saying only, "It's on your tab, mate, pay me when you can"? Or how a collection mug might suddenly appear on the bar if one of the regulars fell ill, lost work, or suffered a fire. No one asked questions. Everyone simply dropped in their coins, because it was part of the code. It wasn't charity, it was solidarity, and when someone shared a heavy burden, the pub would fall into that special silence asterisk, awkward, but heavy with sympathy. You might see one of the older regulars place a hand on a shoulder without a word, and that meant more than any speech. Do you remember those double clinks of glasses? One for a new beginning, one for someone gone. Here, birthdays were celebrated, new jobs toasted, engagements cheered, and the sharp chime of glasses echoed through the room, carried by a wave of laughter and joy. And when one of the regulars passed away, the pub carried a very different tone. Silence, louder than any shout. A deep sigh moving through the room when someone spoke the name of the departed. People came to share grief quietly, to drink one last pint for the one who would never walk through the door again. This was the place where life completed its full circle, from first smiles to final farewells. The pub was a place where you could be vulnerable and still be supported, without saying a word. It was the last bastion of real, unpolished Britain, where you didn't have to be perfect. You were accepted as you were. You could just sit quietly, think, and never explain yourself. You were among your own. If you lived through those years, this isn't a story, it's a memory. A memory of deep, invisible bonds formed not online, but face to face, pint to pint. But this world, so alive, so real, began to fade. Under the weight of new times, new habits, new trends, its soul slowly dimmed, leaving us with the bitter aftertaste of loss. And it is that loss we'll talk about in the next chapter. You've just felt how this world breathed, how it sounded, how it lived. But this world, so real, so full, began to fade. Under the weight of new times, new habits, new trends, its soul slowly dimmed, leaving us with the bitter aftertaste of loss. Do you remember those changes? How one by one, familiar pubs began to close, their old signs rusting in the rain. Or, even worse, how they were renovated, as if their very hearts were torn out. You walk into what they now call a pub. And what do you feel? The cold chime of glasses that look too clean, too identical. The steady, soulless hum of air conditioning instead of the living noise of voices. The smell, it's changed too. Instead of the deep aroma of old wood and aged ale, now you sense something sterile, plastic, like a trendy cafe. And the decor, glossy, with stylish lamps and faceless furniture. Not a single scratch, not a single worn spot to tell a story. None of that warm gleam of brass polished by decades of hands. Behind the bar stands not the landlord, the keeper of secrets, but someone young, polite, yet a stranger. He doesn't know your name. He doesn't know your drink. He's just doing his job. And it's not his fault. He didn't grow up in that world. He doesn't remember what a real pub was. You strain to catch the same sounds, the same laughter, the same voices. But instead there's silence, or some generic background music that means nothing to you. No dull thud of darts. No sharp click of dominoes. No unspoken family gathering there every evening. Where did those people go? They scattered, to their homes, to their screens. Conversations became virtual, not face to face. It wasn't just doors closing, or buildings lost. It was the loss of an entire way of life, built over centuries. Pubs were the centers of communities, places where you could be vulnerable and still be supported, where news spread by word of mouth, where life moved at its own steady rhythm. They were refuge, confessional, second living room. And now, anonymous chains, identical in every city, with the same menu, the same atmosphere, smelling only of cleaning products. If you lived through those years, this isn't just a story, it's a memory. A memory of when the pub wasn't just a place to drink, but a living organism, part of you. And now here we are again, standing at that door. Only this time, it opens not into a warm past, but into a cold present. What we lost wasn't just pubs. It was an entire world. A world that smelled of ale and tobacco, rang with laughter, and swelled with stories. A world where everyone belonged, where no explanations were needed. A world where you felt part of something greater. And that world, sadly, is gone forever. But even if the walls are gone, the memories live on, in each of us who knew that time. In everyone who remembers that smell, that sound, that feeling of belonging. If you feel it too, if you remember that world, if you want to keep those memories alive so they don't vanish into the wind blowing through empty streets, stay with us. Subscribe, so we can keep breathing these stories together, so the echo of that world never fades away completely.